All right, how's it to all of our Flowhound out there? Welcome to this bonus presentation of Winter 20 Release Readiness Live, otherwise known as Flow Pirate Radio, where Flow pros flow. No? Okay. I'm Jason Teller, and I'm here with the Salesforce Flow team, who are ready to share the latest new features enhancements in Winter 20. We may be making some forward-looking statements, so just as a reminder, please make your purchasing decisions based on currently available product. Well, and with that, why don't we do a quick round of intros, and then we can go ahead and get started. And in fact, let's also go ahead and tell everybody what our favorite dessert is. So, I'm Jason Teller. I work on the Flow team. Pretty much anything that's not in the builder is something that I actually work on. And my favorite dessert is actually butter mochi. In fact, I love it so much that I used it to bribe the entire camera crew here to go ahead and let us film this special edition of Flow Pirate Radio. Shannon?
Nice. Hey, Flownatics, I'm Shannon Hale, and I work on the other side of the coin, the Flow Builder product. My favorite dessert would have to be my mom's flapper pie, which is kind of like a custard with a meringue top. It's pretty amazing.
That is excellent. My name is Tim, and I am also a product manager on the Flow team. I am known to love the humble potato, but I think quite honestly there is no dessert so sweet as customer success.
Hi everyone, I'm Merwan. I'm also a product manager on the Flow team. I focus on Einstein Next Best Action. My favorite dessert is a tie between a creme brulee and an Indian dessert called gulab jamun.
Those both sound delicious. I'm Sam Raynard. I'm also a product manager focusing on Flow actions. And my favorite dessert is my grandma's cookies.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all that. Let's go ahead and get into what we want to talk about today. Now, if you guys have actually been listening into the different release readiness knives, you'll know that Tim started this whole process with talking about what we did in Winter 20 in the developer preview, followed by Shannon talking a little bit more about what we did in the builder and the admin preview. And then finally, with myself, I talked about a large demo where we showed an employee app new hire onboarding experience in the platform release readiness live. And I promised you in that Release Readiness Live that we would actually take the same demo and break it down into a lot more detail, because we always get that question, so how'd you build the demo? I mean, it's really cool, but I'd like to be able to do that too. And so that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and give you another overview of the demo, and then each one of the product managers, in fact, who built the different parts of the demo, will be telling you a bit about how that actually got built. Now, along the way, I also mentioned in yesterday's Release Readiness Live that we had a number of additional features we didn't get a chance to get to. So while we do that, we will also be telling you about those new features. Features such as user profile access to go ahead and run a flow as a particular user. Additional features around NBA where I didn't get actually a chance to do a demo, but Warren's going to be able to demo those for you. So we've got a lot of great content. Let's go ahead and dive right into the demo itself. Now, if you remember, I started the demo by identifying the two primary personas. In this particular new hire onboarding demo, we have Eric Ware. He's the new hire that needs to be onboarded. And then we have Kat Lawrence. Kat is the hiring manager that has to go through the onboarding process along with Eric. And the whole goal here is to provide a seamless user experience using Flow that allows all of this stuff to be taken care of and automated prior to Eric's actual day one orientation. So let's jump into the demo and take a look at what that looks like. So if you remember, I went ahead and said that we have an email that starts the entire process off for Eric. This email is actually generated by a scheduled flow. And in point of fact, if you look at this scheduled flow that generated the email actually ran at 12:05 today. When I click on this email, it says, be careful. That's good. The email is doing its job. And then basically we have the link here that shows we need to go to this to actually continue the ongoing process. So scheduled flow takes you via link to a flow inside of the community. In this community flow, we're actually pulling back Eric's contact information so that way he can make that update that we talked about where we said his real name may be Erickson, but he wants to be called Eric. And this is the whole point of doing an onboarding flow early on in the process where they can update the contact info. So now Eric can simply be Eric for things like his ID, for any other information he has on the intranet. Basically, he doesn't have to show up and have everybody saying, hello, Erickson, on his first day. So basically, we go ahead and click next here. And this is going to go ahead and make that update to his contact information, as well as it's going to trigger a chatter update post to Kat to go ahead and tell her to continue this overall process via the console experience and the flow that she has there. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop into Kat's role. If I scroll down here, I can see that just with a quick refresh, we've got Kat receiving the information from Eric, who had updated his contact info to review the applicant record, and go ahead and click on that. And now we arrive at Eric Ware's applicant record. Now, I need to do a quick refresh here to reflect the actual contact info update that I did. As you can see, the contact info was updated by the flow. A couple things to point out, as I did in the original demo. Next best action, we have the recommendation component using the intelligence that it has to basically say, we recommend that you remind Eric, based on what we know, to bring his ID documents for day one orientation. Next best action, super powerful component. I'm really glad we have Merwan here to actually talk a little bit more about it and what you can do with it, as well as show a demo. So we'll be delving into a little bit more of that in Merwan's section. So let's go ahead and run this particular flow, the new employee onboarding flow. So when I pull this employee onboarding flow up here, a couple things that I pointed out. We have the stages in the flow. Stages are very dynamic. You can actually put them where you need to in the flow, and as you branch, you can change the stages as you go. And then these are all out-of-the-box fields that actually comprise the flow screen, including dependent pick list that is showing here. So I go ahead and select, I review the contact info, everything's great. I do the dependent pick list on the role, and then I go ahead and move to the next flow screen. Now, one of the cool things about this flow screen is the feature we have in Winter 20 around conditional visibility. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now because this is the section that Shannon's going to be talking about in terms of the stuff that her team designed around conditional visibility. So let's hold that for now, but I'm going to go ahead and make the selections here. We're going to show how you can make something disappear. We're going to give Eric that now antiquated iPhone XS phone because, you know, that's how things work with the iPhone 11 that just came out. And we'll go ahead and go to the next screen. So Shannon's going to talk about all the stuff that we just did. It updated a bunch of Salesforce records, did a lot of cool stuff in the background. Should also be telling you a bunch about the builder improvements that we've made there. Now we move into the third-party integration piece. We actually have a Lightning component here that actually will be able to do a Slack callout and integration. It's already pulled the information from Slack, and we are going to do a real-time callout, as you can see here. When I select these channels for Eric and click Next, there's also the welcome message. It's going to do the real-time callout to create these channels inside of Slack. Subsequently, we're also going to be doing a Quip folder update where we go ahead and select Quip folders, and we will be generating those folders, or I should say sharing those folders inside of Quip. I'm going to pause really quick here and say that this is the section that Tim is going to be talking about because he's the one that created it, and give you a really in-depth explanation about how you leverage these Lightning components as well as the callouts for these third-party integrations. So I click Next here, and as you can see, we're going to go ahead and have those shared folders shown here inside of the Quip, and so it basically did the third-party callout and provided that integration information. Next, once I click here, it's going to grab all the information that we need, generate that email to go ahead and conclude the onboarding process. This is actually pretty standard flow functionality that already exists today. And then when I go and look over here, it says, hey, Eric, welcome to the team. We have all your information, the Slack channels, the Quip folders, and et cetera that we added you to. And that completes the overall demo and the overall onboarding process. One other quick note here is that if I now go to the employees, I can see that employee record for Eric Ware has been created. That's something else that the flow did as part of Shannon's part, as well as generating the equipment records that we require for Eric's onboarding. So that's it. That's the end-to-end of the demo and the breakdown of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to start actually breaking down this demo with the scheduled flow. So that was actually one of the pieces that I built. And when I go to setup here, we're going to end up, once I get to flows, at our new Lightning flow list view. So the Lightning Flow list view is a great addition we have in Winter 20. It's got a lot of usability improvements on it. It basically has the ability to one-click into a particular, let me just shrink this a little bit, one-click into a particular flow. We also have the right side drop down here, which allows you to look at specific details and versions. And I'm going to go ahead and click through to show you what that experience is like. And then you basically end up at the specific versions page that you had before. If I go back here, you can also see, and Tim's actually going to cover this, there's an edit access portion, which is the user profile-based access to run the flow. That is something we also added in Winter 20 and we haven't had a chance to talk about. So you're lucky that Tim, the PM in charge of that, is able to tell you about that as well. And then finally, we have the edit details, which will take you to the flow details page where you can identify it as a template, etc. So really, really powerful with the new flow list view here. And one of the cool things about this list view, the reason we did it as a Lightning list view, besides all the bells and whistles for Lightning, is that you actually have the capability to have and see what we call standard flows. So standard flows are basically flows that are provided by Salesforce clouds. So as you enable certain clouds, such as Financial Services Cloud and such, you'll actually see the flows that they provided inside this list view as well. The last thing I want to cover in my section here is the fact that you can, if you want, go ahead and go to Process Automation Settings and turn off the Lightning list view and go ahead and move it back to the classic list view if you find that you need to do that. So obviously, we made a bunch of changes. We want to make sure that you enjoy it. But if you do need to, that is available to you in Process Automation Settings. So with that, the new Winter 20 scheduled flow functionality. So this is the scheduled flow functionality. As Shannon will mention and has mentioned in her developer admin preview, you can move the start node around now, but you can also double click on it. And one of the things we've introduced with the Winter 20 feature set is the ability to actually leverage a flow trigger. So this is a new pattern we're introducing, how you could trigger a flow. You can select none and basically just run the flow as you had today, and everything kind of defaults to that currently. But should you choose to, you can actually now, with the schedule trigger, actually use a schedule. And in this case, you basically set the schedule with the date and the time, and then the frequency, which is once daily or weekly that you want this schedule to run. And then you can run it against a set of records. In this case, we're selecting the applicant object, and we make sure certain conditions are met in order for that to actually run against those records. Now, a word on how scheduled flows basically work. I mentioned in my platform preview that basically it's a replacement for batch jobs. So what you would normally need to do scheduled Apex as well as batch Apex, now an admin is empowered to essentially create that similar type of job. And it functions very similarly as well. When a schedule is actually teed up, it doesn't actually run any flows until the schedule starts. And then when the schedule trigger happens, it does this query first to pull back all the records that are associated with the criteria here. And then for each record that is pulled back, it actually runs the flow against those records. Now that's really different from, say, a scheduled action that you may be familiar with. Scheduled actions are actually flows that have been run and are they're paused for a certain amount of time and then continue running. So it's very similar to a paused flow. In that context. And the reason I bring that up is because if I go back over here, you're not going to find scheduled flows inside the paused interviews area. In fact, you're going to find them under scheduled jobs. So if I look at scheduled jobs here, I am going to see, along with the batch Apex and scheduled Apex jobs that are being run, this scheduled flow that I actually created. It shows when it was submitted, when it was started, when it's next running, and basically it ran today, and that's how we got the email that kicked this whole process off. So just a couple notes about that to help you understand how these things actually work, why they're different from scheduled actions. And one final note here is that these evaluative conditions are part of the query that's actually being run to return the records that we run the flow on. So a lot of the information you would typically have when you're actually running a flow isn't necessarily available because it's a trigger that's doing a query. So one of the examples here that I actually baked into the demo is the fact that we want to go ahead and run the schedule for somebody who's starting inside of the next 2 weeks. Well, you can't necessarily evaluate a date formula inside of this particular condition because, again, it's constructing a query that's actually then pulling the records back for. So what I did was I actually created a custom field on top of the applicant record that evaluates the formula for me and then says, is the person starting in the next 2 weeks? If so, then the field is going to say true. And then I can go ahead and check that field to see whether or not it's true, and that's what this is doing when it retrieves the records, finds the ones that are true, runs the flow against each one, and actually does the email send that way. So with that, I will now actually hand it over to Shannon, who is going to talk a little bit more about how she built the section of the onboarding flow.
All right, so changes that we made to the flow canvas here. We did a bunch of what Sam and I like to call small but mighty changes. We got rid of that keyboard shortcut that you used to need to go into pan mode. Now you can just click and drag on the canvas. You can move the start node, as Jason mentioned. One little thing to note is that for screen flows, you can't double click into it because there's only one type of screen flow, so there's no configuration to be done there. The other thing that we added was, as you might have noticed, there are now 2 lines of labels. So create employee record no longer just says create employee rec. And lastly, another highly requested feature, we now have a button that allows you to drag a marquee around your contents, and then all of the stuff that's selected, you are able to move and or delete. Obviously, I'm not going to delete it just at the moment. So those are kind of like the big ones for the canvas for the moment. Now, inside the screen, we have a few new things. We have the ability to add Lightning Web components starting in Winter 20, and I'm going to let Tim talk about that. The other thing that we have, so you remember this page, there was a bunch of fields, first name, last name, position, and so on, dependent pick list. Now, suppose we have decided that we are going to add a new program here for onboarding, and it's going to be called Onboarding Buddy because Sam is a genius. So what I'm going to do here is for an onboarding buddy, we want to be able to look up another employee. So I'm going to look for the lookup component. We have a brand new out-of-the-box lookup component. I'm going to put it down below this dependent pick list. Now, one of the things that comes up in a question a lot is people are, especially if they've used the community feature for lookup component, is they wonder how they're actually supposed to configure this. So let's call it Onboarding Buddy. So it's actually expecting the API name of an actual object and an actual field. So in this case, my object is going to be employee __ C. And my field is going to be onboarding buddy __ C. My label is going to be onboarding buddy. Should have picked something shorter. I'm going to go ahead and click done and see if it lets me do that. Okay, great. So what does that look like? Well, let's go take a look. All right, so I'm going to go into Eric's applicant record. I'm going to get the ID for the applicant record so I can run the demo. And we'll go back and we'll go for debug. I'm going to enter the record ID for Eric's applicant record and go ahead and run it. And now you can see that we have an onboarding buddy field. Let me make that a little bit bigger for everyone. We have an onboarding buddy field, and just like regular Salesforce lookups, I can see my recent employees that were done. I'm actually going to go ahead and make Gemma here his onboarding buddy, and I could move on and save. So that's one of the great things that we've added in Winter 20. The second thing that I want to talk about is actually on the outfitting, which was where we had the toggles. So we had, does the new hire need a laptop? Yes. Well, what kind of laptop did they want? So in these cases, we don't necessarily want to show the laptop type unless we actually need a laptop, because that's a lot of extra stuff on the page. So what we've added in Winter 20 is this new conditional field visibility, or conditional screen component visibility. So toggle here is a Boolean. It's going to be true or false. And one thing that I want to talk about here is that when we have screen components now, we have this option to manually assign variables or not to assign them. So if you recall, for Lightning components, you quite frequently need to create a new variable resource and assign the value to that value. Now we don't have to do that anymore. So we can basically automatically assign them. And then when we go to the laptop type here and we go down to set component visibility, what we have here as an option is, let me just go back in here. We have the screen component called needs desktop or needs laptop. And just like an S object or Apex type or other complex types, I now see the output variables for the screen component, and I can just say that its value needs to be equal to what have you, true in this case. If you've used conditional visibility in Lightning App Builder, it's very similar. The last thing we want to talk about is something else that people have been asking a lot for. We've made all these great changes, we're ready to go, we're not working in production because we obviously don't work on live flows in production except in demos. I can click activate and I can go ahead and activate my flow without having to go back to the detail page, without having to do any additional work. It just deactivates previous version and starts the new one, and we're done. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tim to tell us how he worked with the LWC components.
Thanks, Shannon. So for those of you who tuned into the developer webinar on, I think it was Friday morning, you would have seen that I did an integration with MuleSoft to show some of the really neat interoperability components between our platform or Flow and many of the other more programmatic automation tools on platform. So today, in the demo that Jason showed, there were two sets of integrations that were performed as part of the demo. The first one was an integration to Slack, and the second one was an integration to Quip. Now, integrating to Quip is actually way too easy to actually show how it's done. So I'm going to show you how we did that Slack integration with less than 500 lines of code. Just kidding, it's less than 100 lines of code. So this is a really neat and my favorite screen in the entire demo because it really shows the ability to create a customer experience that pulls data from an external system. It includes an Aura component, it includes a Flow screen standard component, and finally a Lightning Web component, all in the same page without having to worry about interoperability at all. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we did in this integration was we fetched a list of Slack channels in a workspace and brought it into Flow. And we accomplished this using two major technologies that we have developed in the last several releases. The first one is what we call Apex types. And this is a way to represent a web object inside of Salesforce using an Apex class. The second piece of technology was our integration with Lightning Web Components and the ability to now expose a Lightning Web Component inside of a Flow and pass information between Flow and the LWC. So the first thing that we do when we think about integration, of course, is we think about what are the APIs and what is the data that we are trying to pull into Flow. In this case, it is super simple. All we have to do is look at the Slack API that retrieves a list of conversations, and they actually will give us an example of the web object that is returned from that API. As I scroll through here, you can see that it's a very verbose API that contains a lot of metadata, some of which is very valuable to this use case, such as the name of the channel, the ID of the channel, and whether it's private, but a lot of metadata that is also not particularly useful and actually creates a bit of noise. So what we actually did is we also did a little bit of cleansing in between. So let's just jump right in. What you're looking at here is the web representation of that web object, and we used Apex types to represent that object inside of Salesforce as a class. I actually did not have to write a single line of the code in this class. I used our favorite online website, JSON to Apex, and just pasted that JSON in there, and it gave me this class. Super simple. But the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to take this web object and make it more concise so that I could pull it into Flow and only have the information that I needed. And so I created a new object with only 5 fields, and I call this the Slack channel concise object. Inside of it, you can see that I have the name of the channel, the ID of the channel, whether the channel is private or not, the number of members in the channel, and the purpose of the channel. Note that I've identified 2 annotations for each property, an Aura-enabled and invocable variable. And so this allows it to be used in Flow in many different ways. Now, I've created now the representation of a Slack channel that I want to pass into a flow. The next step is to actually do it inside of the Apex invocable action. And so what we did there was we created an Apex invocable action using the @invocable method annotation that very simply just performs a call out to the Slack endpoint using named credentials so that I don't have to store my passwords in code, and pulls that into the flow and returns that list of Slack channels into the flow. Less than 30 lines of code, and all of this is actually pretty standard boilerplate for any time you do an HTTP request. Now, by bringing that into flow, I can actually then represent that web object using an Apex type variable. And in this case, it's a collection because there are multiple Slack channels. And so you can see here in this Apex action, I'm storing the results of that Apex action into a variable of an Apex defined collection type, all Slack channels. And that specific all Slack channels is of type Slack channel concise. So that is what matches the name of the class that I have exposed using Apex types. Now, the very interesting part of this demo is actually now taking that set or that collection of Apex type objects and showing it to the user in an LWC and allowing the user to select a set of those to add Eric Ware to. And so that seemed complicated, but it's actually super simple. I actually achieved that with less than probably 50 lines of code, maybe less than 30 in fact. So this is about bringing your LWCs to flows. So it's very easy to expose an LWC to flow. The very first thing you do is you go to the JavaScript meta config file for that Lightning Web Component, and you expose the lightning __ flow screen component into the targets list, and you define the set of properties that you want the flow to be able to consume from the Lightning Web Component or to be able to pass into the Lightning Web Component as an input. That was, maybe 3 lines there, and what that allows you to do is it allows you to find that Lightning Web Component, which is called the Slack channel table view, inside of the screen components list, drag it in, and then those same inputs and outputs that were defined inside of the meta config are now exposed to Flow Builder inside of the right-hand side of this screen. So you can see I'm inputting the list of all Slack channels, and the output is the set of selected Slack channels. The only remaining work that needs to be done is to actually code the component itself. And you can see how simple that was. All I had to do was define the set of columns inside of that table and just say that every time somebody updates or selects a particular row, to update the set of selected rows in the component. And so it's super simple, and with that you get the power of a Slack channel Lightning Web Component table view inside of the Flow Builder experience.
That's really awesome. So you said that the Quip integration was really simple. Could you expound on that a little bit? Do we have some easily available quick actions or something like that?
Yeah, so the reason it is so simple is because the Quip team has actually done a number of excellent amount of work here in the last several releases and added a bunch of out-of-the-box Quip actions directly into the Flow Builder experience so that you can take advantage of the tight coupling and first-class experience when you use Salesforce products.
That's really awesome. So what we have here is basically an example of how you can actually create an LWC and do a custom integration with Slack, or another example of how you could basically do this with an out-of-the-box action that's actually, say, provided by Quip. So great examples of integration. Thank you, Tim.
And now let me hand the computer over to Marwan.
I think you also were going to talk a little bit about user profile access for flows, which I think is very useful in this demo, for example, because when you're onboarding somebody, you may actually want to restrict who can actually run those particular flows.
Right. So, thanks for the reminder, Jason. So, what I forgot to mention is actually this release and the next release, we are adding a number of super powerful functionalities to Flow. And so we want to give you the ability to restrict who's allowed to run any particular flow. As a reminder, today, any user with the Run Flows user perm or the Flow user license, feature license, can run any flow. And there may be some flows that you want to build out either now or in the future that are going to do certain things that you don't want just anybody able to use. And so what we've done is we've gone ahead and done a direct integration with profiles and perm sets to allow you to restrict at the flow level who is allowed to run a flow. And so it's actually very easy to do this. You go to that new flow list view, you hit that caret on the right, and you click on this button here that says Edit Access. And what you can see here is a very familiar experience. Now, you probably have seen this in the Apex class access page as well as a few other pages in setup. But the one difference is you have to turn off the current flow restriction to turn on profile restricted access. So by clicking this, what I have said is no longer do I want just anybody with the run flow or manage flow or flow user permission to be able to run this flow, but rather I'm going to follow the principle of least access and opt a certain set of profiles in to be able to run this flow. Once I save this, the only people who will be allowed to run this flow are people with the profiles on the right. You can also restrict access to run a flow to a set of permission sets from the permission sets page. And if you want to restrict flows to a certain set of community user profiles, you can do that from the community user profile page.
Cool, that's really awesome, Tim. I think we've had a lot of requests around, how do I sort of handle who and when somebody can run, when somebody and who can run actually a particular flow, because security is always a concern, especially when you have these automations that can perform all sorts of different actions. So this, I think, is a really, really huge addition to our Winter 20. Well, like I said, we didn't get a chance to talk about this before, so really glad you covered it here. So thank you very much, Tim. Why don't we move on to Marwan, who's going to tell us all we need to know about NBA.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Tim. So we've had an action-packed release with Next Best Action. We made several improvements to our strategy builder. We made it easier for you to get started with strategy templates. We've also enhanced the recommendation experience. So I'm going to dive right into a demo. So here, in the setup page for Next Best Action, you'll notice a set of strategies, but in particular, look at the last one, which says upsell to existing cases. Now, this was installed as a template, which means that I can use it as a boilerplate or as a starting point for creating my own strategies. Let's go ahead and click into it. Now, when I open this strategy, the first thing you'll notice is that save is grayed out. And that's because this is a template, which means that you have to create your own copy before you start to make any customizations. So let's go ahead and do a save as. Let's say upsell, let's say generators. And we'll keep our API name to be the same. And we'll go ahead and click done. Now, what we're doing is we're customizing our own copy of that template that we created earlier. Now, the first thing I want to point out that's new in the strategy builder with this release is the ability to write expressions in the branch selector node. In an earlier release, we had support for filter. We've now added the same for branch as well. So you'll notice that here, instead of having to type in an expression to say, only show this recommendation or the record status does not equal to new, I can actually use this nice little expression builder tool to help me craft that expression. Now, what this particular strategy is doing is that it's loading a set of recommendation where the category equals to upsell. And it's only showing that recommendation if and only if the case status is not new. Now, what we can do is we can take this recommendation and enhance it a little further by using the map node. So we'll just drop that onto the canvas. And we'll say include a 5% discount. So what we'll do is we'll take our existing recommendation and we'll map a new name variable to it. So instead of just saying, here's the title of this recommendation, we're actually going to include a 5% discount in that title. So we'll just say the name, and we'll say name plus with a 5% discount. Now, I wanted to point out another cool feature that we've just added with this release, the ability to do undo and redo. Ooh. Yes. And let me tell you, my friends, this is a lifesaver. It makes writing strategies so much easier. So let's go ahead and save this. Okay, so let's see it in action. So I'm going to switch over to an existing case that we have here where the status is equal to working. So I should see my recommendations show up here. And I see them on the right-hand side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open the app builder. and we're going to switch to the strategy that we just created. So instead of pointing to upsell existing cases, we'll point to upsell generators. And you'll notice that we now start seeing the enhancement that we made. So you see the name generator GC5061, but it now also includes the customization that we made of a 5% discount. Now, a couple of things I want to point out here is that we've added this new ability to show and hide the title. So now, in addition to showing a description of the recommendation, you can also show the title. Now, furthermore, our Next Best Action Lightning component can also be embedded on home pages. So you can choose, if you'd like, to also show recommendations that are aggregated. So for instance, I could show all of the recommendations that apply to a specific user. For instance, the accounts that they should follow up with, maybe because the last contact was a certain number of days ago. Now let's go ahead and save this and accept the recommendation. Now, you'll notice that in addition to being able to launch screen flows, we can also launch auto launch flows. So in this case, when I hit continue, an email is being sent to the customer letting them know about a 5% discount on this GC5061 generator. Now, that's sort of the whole set of updates that we have with Next Best Action for the winter release. I did also want to point out a cool new resource that we've been working on for the last few months, our unofficial SF site, which has a whole set of new resources, including links to our most recent conference sessions, links to our documentation. We've just added a wiki. We also have an integration guide, which allows you to, which helps you to how you can connect with external data sources. So you can use the generate node to generate recommendations on the fly. You can use the enhance node to customize your recommendations, and also use map to make on-the-fly edits and also set input variables that you can pass to a flow. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jason.
All right, thank you, Marwan. Really, really powerful stuff with Next Best Action and NBA.
Wait, Jason. Are you really done? Are you not going to talk about what happens when the demo breaks?
Sam, the demo never breaks.
Sure.
Always.
Sure.
No? Okay.
Good.
What happens when the demo breaks? Tell us.
All right. So if you're at all familiar with Flow, which we dearly hope that you are if you're tuning into this, you may know that back in summer 18 or so, we added the ability for you to take those long error emails and make sure they always go to the same email address, which means that the person who created it no longer always gets it. But what if you want those errors to be notified by chatter or SMS or in-app or something? We've this release added a new standard platform event that lets you do just that. So I will show you a really quick demo. I'm going to make this flow fail. It's supposed to create an account, and if I don't give it a name, it's going to complain because there's a missing required field. And I see immediately that this in-app notification bell has a new notification and tells me that the quick account flow has failed. And if I click through on this notification, I'm taken to a group dedicated to flow errors. And the most recent feed item is explaining all of the things that happened, which is what I expected. Required field missing. You can't create an account without a name, obviously. And so then I could go back and make that a required field in my flow as I'm building this. But this also makes it so that when we are building a demo together, as we all were, I don't have to continue to bug Jason to forward me the error emails. When I break the flow, I can just come to one place. And real quick, I'll show you what the actual process looks like of how we built that. So we have a new platform event, as I mentioned, and this one's called Flow Execution Error Event. Actually, NBA has had the same thing for a couple of releases now since Spring 19, Platform Status Alert Event, right?
That's right.
Where you can basically do the same thing of detect when a flow, or a strategy in that case, has failed. The one caveat we have is that this is currently only applying to screen flows, so we're looking into how it will work or when we will offer it up for the other process types. And so here in this process, I have two actions. One of them is a send custom notification action. And if you're not familiar with this, super cool. You can basically set up notification types and have Process Builder send in-app or push notifications within Salesforce, both on desktop and mobile. Really powerful stuff, as well as posting to Chatter. And the last thing I wanted to highlight about this is that in both of these actions, something you couldn't do before is actually add information from the platform event directly into the message that you're going to post. So what I had done previously was grab the error message and it'll insert it directly into my Chatter post here. And that's my demo.
That's awesome, Sam. So I guess you're right. There is stuff that happens in case the demo actually doesn't work. I stand corrected. This is really, really cool, though, because we get a lot of requests in terms of error handling and how can I actually make sure that alerting happens and gets to the right person. And so by providing this sort of standard platform event, and as you demonstrated, it's true for any platform event now, you can actually use that event payload information inside of both custom notifications as well as Chatter. So that's an addition we also made in Winter 20. But I get that IT alerting capability that I really need as part of how I need to run my business. So really, really cool. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. There's a lot more we can do. So let's go ahead and go back to the slides, and I'm just going to go over a quick list of everything we actually delivered inside of Winter 20. So as you can tell, it's actually hard for us to keep all this stuff in our heads because we did so much stuff. And we tried to give you as much of a taste as we actually can or could in this particular session. One other thing I want to bring up is that we actually received a number of requests around test coverage numbers when utilizing CI/CD, which is something we introduced a couple releases ago with Flow. That is actually was tied to the Apex level of test coverage, so you'd be adjusting both, and people didn't want to do that. They wanted to maintain Apex test coverage and maybe adjust the Flow test coverage. So now if you go into process automation settings and you have the CI/CD bit enabled, you can actually specify just by simply typing it in the test coverage that you actually want for that particular org inside of process automation settings. So really beneficial there in terms of making it work with your CI/CD and your overall development process, making Flow work with that, I should say. So this is the big list. You can have it, look at it in your leisure. I also want to point out that we closed nearly 25,000 ID exchange points in Winter 20. Our scheduled flow functionality was one of the big winners there, but it's a big long list of all of the things. A lot of the stuff that Shannon showed you in terms of the flow builder, we closed all of that stuff out. So we're really, really proud to actually present all of that to you, our users, as benefits and points closed in the ID exchange. And finally, I just want to say to learn more about Flow, you obviously can go to Trailhead to learn how to use Flow and how to build with Flow. We have getting started tutorials and videos that you can use. And we also have, let's not forget, our Flow Solutions category on the App Exchange. Go there to go check out downloadable Flow actions. You can simply install them as well as Flow templates. And I'm really, really proud to announce that we're going to have over 30 plus new Lightning Labs Flow templates on the App Exchange in the next several weeks. Tons of great examples out there to really help you eliminate that blank canvas anxiety when you're looking there and not exactly sure where to start. We would suggest, or I would suggest, go to the App Exchange in the Flow Solutions category, and you'll be able to actually pick up a Flow template to get you started. Anything from something like a questionnaire to even more complicated examples. We'll be having a template up there for actually getting consent for marketing as a visual flow that you can then copy, edit, and modify. So really powerful. Definitely take a look at that when you get a chance.
I think these are great because even just earlier today, I had someone who said it was a lot easier for them to start from an existing flow just so that they could understand the mechanics. And this is exactly the kind of thing that they would need.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've gotten a lot of really, really positive feedback for this, and we're hoping that more and more folks in the community can actually create them as well. Because that's really where you want to start, something to just start with and get that business process that you need. So that's it for our Winter 20 release. Lots and lots of stuff in there. If you have any comments or questions, please post those in Release Readiness Trailblazers, or alternatively, we're all on the Flow Trailblazer community, as you well know. Please post those questions there. We're happy to respond and talk as much as we can about all of these great features that we introduced. So with that, I want to just say mahalo nui loa, thank you very much, and we will see you next time here on the Flow Special Edition, Flow Pirate Radio, where Flow pros flow.